study of Jacob is really probably the most thorough lifespan study in all of the scriptures, from conception to death, and years of historical record in between all of that. And as the prophet Hosea reminded the children of Israel, this man's life was marked by conflict. The struggles that he had weren't periodic and occasional. They were consistent through his entire life. He struggled in his mother's womb and doesn't stop until he's still struggling with the same person. Almost 100 years later, he's still in conflict, and he has difficulty all the way through. Dealing with conflict, resolving that, coming to grips with that, and ultimately he has the greatest encounter with God probably in the Old Testament in an all-night hand-to-hand wrestling match on the banks of a river, in which the text kind of gives us the idea that it was a successful match, but not because he ends up coming out worse for wear, as we'll see. He gets the worst end of it, and yet it's successful because he's finally come to grips with his relationship with God and has resolved that. And hopefully as we resolve our relationship with God and the conflicts that we have with him, we can work on resolving the other conflict-related relationships in our life. And so we've been looking at the conflict resolution that is taking place throughout this man's life, because we can take that and go, oh, that's how we do it in our home. That's how I do it in my life. And that's how we can, if we're not careful, do it in our church. And we want to see this for what it is and make adjustments, because at some point, conflict becomes generational. And that's what we were looking at last week. We watched mom and dad's conflict resolution skills with each other, with the people around them, with their sons, and then what we're going to see is that conflict resolution just passes on to the next generation until I guess some generation just goes, okay, that's enough. Or a new person comes into the family, like a spouse, and goes, you guys need to work on this, because that's just, I know that's normal for you, but that's not normal, and we need to, so sometimes a spouse can come in and go, oh, wait a minute, time out. I know this is the way grandma did it, and great-grandma did it, and your mom did it, but that's not the way we should be doing it. Because generational conflict exists, and it's passed on to us. We learn these skills. And really, conflict resolution is a skill that has worked for us at some point, and so we keep trying it. If you remember on page 8, I'll just review from last week and then we'll jump in. We saw typical conflict resolution methods unfolding in chapter 25 and chapter 26. Those of you that filled out your outline number 1, what was one of it's all a very typical conflict resolution methodology that we saw in that 25th chapter, starting with the F. Fight. Just gonna fight. Gonna win at all costs. I'm going to win the argument. I'm going to win the battle. I'm going to win. And there's lots of ways to fight. You can fight dirty. You can fight covertly. You can fight, I got a model as growing up, one of the ways that you fight, then you can almost always win this fight. You just stop talking.
Passive aggressive.
For weeks if necessary. And you're just like, I won because we're not talking. And you can just shut down. Right? And that's fighting. It's a way to fight, but it's
It's the way I got preference in high school.
Very true.
Oh, great. Now we know where that came from. The second one was there's the fight instinct. To just fight, to battle. Sometimes people are just looking for something to be offended at and go off. There's a second method that was used by mom and dad in Genesis chapter 25 with these 2 boys, and it also started with the F. Favoritism. You can win a battle by getting more people on your side than on their side. Happens in businesses, happens in churches, and sometimes happens in families if they're big enough. You get more people to believe your side of the situation, and you'll win. Because you can just, most of the time, the only story that they've heard is your side. And you can tell a wonderful side of your story, and everyone will be convinced you are 110% right, and that person is 110% wrong, because that's all they've heard. They just heard your side of the story, and they've taken up your side, which is tragic because now they're part of a conflict that wasn't theirs. They're part of a problem that wasn't theirs. They've gotten involved, and they didn't need to, except that's a way to win by getting them involved and on your side. And if it really comes down to it, you can take a vote and you'll win, because all you need is 51%. Favoritism, it's choosing up sides. We saw an example of Esau as he decides, I'm done fighting with my brother over this birthright, and I'm just going to do what? Starts with an A. Abandon. I'm done. Take the birthright. I don't want it. It's yours. I don't want this conflict over the birthright anymore. And so it's like the boy who just took his football and went home because he didn't like the way the rest of the boys were playing with him. Just took his ball in his car. He just abandoned the situation. Families, we see this in families in our communities. We see it people in church. People get upset about something. We don't ever know about it. They just leave. Where's so-and-so? We don't have any idea. They just abandoned. Esau was great at this one, but he learned it really well from his mom and his dad. And there is a way to resolve conflict through, starts with the D in chapter 26. Deceive. He deceived his brother, and it is actually his name. It implies the deception on the part of a person, and he kind of had that general character quality, negative, bad character quality through his life. And he was a man of great deception, and he didn't fall very far from the tree. The last one we saw in Isaac, and his inability to resolve conflict caused him to just do what? To flee. Figure the next place will be better. And he gets there and it's the same problem. And so he runs again. And when he got there, it was the same problem. Just different people, but it was the exact same problem. And he couldn't resolve it in the first. He didn't resolve it well in the first go around, and he couldn't in the second, and he couldn't in the third. And I know you know people, and you may be probably one of these is your go-to. There's only a handful of conflict resolution skills out there, and all of us have a go-to, especially when we're under stress, when we're under difficult circumstances. We have that go-to. Probably worked for us when we were 4 or 5 or 16, and we just keep going to it. It's what we know, it's what we're familiar with, unless we make a conscious effort. One way to do it is just to flee. I don't like the situation, they don't like me, this isn't working, I don't like it, I'm going here. Then when you get there, for some weird reason, nobody likes you again, it doesn't work out, it's not good, so you move again, and then it's just, wow, look, it's the same thing. It's almost like it's the same people, time after time, but it's just a different face. The real common denominator is you. And your inability to deal with that, it just gets passed on again and again and again. That's what happens in the life of Isaac in this situation. And yet we have one biblical model that is followed by, of all people, the pagan Philistine king Abimelech. 3 times he follows what will become a biblical model. He has a sit-down conversation, one-on-one, there's no record that he gathers the sides and gets all the people upset at Isaac, and he just goes to him, just the 2 of them. He does it again later on in the story, and then finally, in this last resolution that you'll see in these chapters, he takes 2 people with him. And they come together and they say, we gotta resolve this. We need to live at peace with each other. This has got to stop. And you can think of all the people, it would have been a covenant person, someone who was part of God's blessed covenant relationship. It's not. It's a Philistine who finally interrupts the issue and says, we need to sit down. We just need to talk about this. And it's amazing how that unfolds, and we'll see that a little bit tonight. If you have your Bibles in Genesis 25 and 26. The first time it shows up That is this conflict resolution skill. It's the unique one out of all of them. The first time that Abimelech follows a really good principle happens in chapter 26, starting with verse 9. Well, verse 8. The he is Isaac. Isaac had been there a long time. He was going to go for a short little period of time, but he stays really longer than he should have. And in that time period, he has been telling everyone, and his sons must have been in on it because they're there a long time. This isn't like a weak deception, like mom and dad are going to deceive all the people of this Philistine king for a couple of days. No, this ruse, is that the right word? This ruse goes on for a long time. They deceive the people and the king for a long period of time until the king somehow sees a little bit of public affection that was a little odd for a brother and sister. When they had been there a long time, Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, looked out of his window and saw Isaac, and in my ESV it says laughing with Rebekah. That is a very nice euphemism. One old translation says caressing her. They are engaging in very, very adult public affection towards one another as husband and wife, which is a really great thing. But they've been deceiving the whole nation that they're living with, that they're brother and sister. And so what happens? Does Abimelech come in and immediately, take him on? There's going to be a fight. He's going to run him out. Does he gather the nation together and say, okay, everybody, this is what has happened. I need everyone to know, and this is not right, and I want everyone who's on my side to come with me. We're going to confront this couple. He doesn't do any of the things that we watch this family do. He goes to Abimelech. He goes to Isaac. So Abimelech called Isaac, and he said to him, behold, called Isaac and said, behold, she is your wife. How then could you say she is my sister? So he's like, look, we got a conflict here. Help me out. Help me figure this out. There's no accusation at this point. There's ask, and this is a great conflict resolution skill. This might be worth tonight's time. Don't, whatever you do, make accusation as your first line of conversation. You will immediately build defenses. They have to defend themselves. If you come in blazing guns and accusing somebody, even if they're guilty, they have to build walls of protection. And so the rule is don't make accusations, ask for clarification. And that's what he's doing. Can you clear this up for me? I saw you two, and sister, brother, what's going on here? So he's asking, give me some clarification on this. I don't understand what's happening. You said she's your sister. And now Isaac has a chance to explain. Because that's the next thing you want. You're going to ask for clarification. Now Isaac has a chance to explain. His explanation is a flat-out admission of lying and deceiving everybody, but at least he's had a chance to explain. If they'd gone in and had a knockout, drag-out fight, all those other conflict resolution types of things, we wouldn't have gotten here. But he's asked for clarification. Now Isaac has a chance to explain. And he says, and he gives us, it is a lame-brained excuse. I thought, lest I die because of her, I'm going to say she's my sister because I'm just a man looking out for myself and willing to throw the love of my life under the bus. I didn't say that, but that's what he basically said. Abimelech said, what is it? Now he's still asking questions. Abimelech is a master here. He has not made one accusation. He's asking questions. That's asking for clarification. It reduces the conflict because he doesn't have to defend himself. He just has to answer the question. What have you done? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife and you would have brought guilt on us. So Abimelech warned the people, saying, whoever touches this man and his wife will surely be put to death. And then they leave. They leave. They're looking for a place to land, to develop their livelihood, their livestock, their family. And so Isaac moves his family. He positions in verse 14 his flock and his herds. He had lots of herds, lots of flock, lots of servants. And the Philistines were a larger group of people as well. And there's conflict. There's envy that is disrupting. The Philistines had stopped and filled the earth all the wells that Isaac's father had dug. And Abimelech said to Isaac, so he goes to him again. Okay, there's a conflict. You're big, we're big. My men are not treating you as we ought to. So instead of us being at conflict, why don't you move and head into it? There's kind of the similar thing that Abraham did with Lot. Remember? Abraham and Lot got so great. Abraham finally came and said, look, we're going to have to break up because there's just too many of us in this small region. That's what Abimelech is like. You head your direction, we'll stay here, and this will eliminate this conflict between us. So he does it again, and then finally, the conflict isn't completely resolved. And so in chapter 26, verse 26, Abimelech then goes a third time, but he doesn't go by himself. Up to this point, the record seems to indicate he's gone by himself. Finally, this time, he goes with an advisor and a commander of his army. They sit down, they have this sworn agreement between themselves. A covenant is reached. In verse 29, so that the reason for that was so that you show no harm to us. We are not going to show any harm to you. We're going to have nothing but good between us, and we're going to go our separate ways in peace. You have the blessing from the Lord. We're now going to be at peace with one another. What could be better than that? So verse 30, he made them a feast. They ate and they drank, and in the morning they rose early, exchanged oaths. Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. The same day Isaac's servants came and told him, we had about a well that they had dug. We found water, and he names the area there Beersheba, and it's named that until this day, and at least that little window of conflict is resolved. What can we learn? I'm going to give you 8 conflict resolution principles that I think come from the text, and also are in keeping with Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 and following. Are you there in your outline? Page number 9. The conflict resolution that Abimelech demonstrates is specific. He has a specific way he's going to communicate. He's thought his way through this. This is not just an attack on the situation. There's a specific personal dialogue that he's going to have with the other person who's involved in the situation. Principle number 1, do not expect the person to come to you. If you have a problem, the only spiritual mature thing to do is to go to them. If you have an issue with someone and do not go to them first, you are now part of the conflict and not the resolution. If you entertain a conversation about someone in conflict, about someone they are in conflict with, you're now part of the conflict and not the resolution. If people come and talk to you about their problems with others, it's not because you're spiritually mature. It's because you'll listen to other people's problems and get involved in other people's problems when Jesus said in Matthew 18, verse 15, if your brother sins against you, go tell him his fault between you and him alone. And in the Greek, it's not a complicated word. Alone means between two. It doesn't mean between 3. It doesn't mean between 4. This is a word that means to get stuck. I mean, it was originally used to get stuck between 2 points. There's only 2 people involved in a conflict at the beginning point. And Abimelech is the one who goes to the one who has offended him. He doesn't wait for Isaac to come and try to resolve the problem. I don't think Isaac realizes it's a problem in his life. He's working his means of deception and keeping things together. It takes Abimelech to come and go, we need to talk through this. In Genesis chapter, we read Genesis 26:8, so we got a little bit of an idea there. But the principle number one is that the spiritually mature individual is to approach the person who's offended them, who has sinned against them, and to discuss it between the two of them. If that individual does not listen to you, there's another step. But if the best possible scenario is that they listen to you, you reconcile, and now you've gained your brother. That's Jesus' teaching in Matthew 18:15. Principle number two, if you can't resolve the issue between just the two of you, don't give up. Ask others to accompany you so that progress will be made. Jesus said in verse 16, if he doesn't listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. The fact that other people are going to now get involved is going to move the process forward, both for good or for bad. It forces the process. But it still has, it's only between just a very small number of people. And that's what we see in Abimelech's approach in this situation. The third principle, don't get thrown off by exaggerated accounts of the past. The past is the past. Avoid allowing it to influence the present. You say, what do you mean by that? When Abimelech confronts Isaac in chapter 26, verse 27, Isaac's reply, well, remember the first reply is this lame-brained excuse. Like, so don't get thrown off by lame-brained excuses. And, he doesn't attack the lame-brained excuse. He just goes, that could have caused us a lot of problems. But the second time he goes to him in chapter 26, and Abimelech said, go your way, you're much greater than we are. That's what this verse, chapter 26, verse 16, is the actual conversation. 26:16 says this, and Abimelech said to Isaac, go away from us, for you are much greater than we. Now look how Isaac has interpreted it and brings it back up sometime later in verse 27. Isaac said to them, why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me and have sent me away from you? You hate, where did he get this idea that he hated him? This is like this exaggerated feeling that he has because he's been in this little conflict. His feelings got hurt. So they said, look, you're going to have to separate and go in a different direction. How has he taken that? Everybody hates me. Everyone's against me. And I can't believe you've come. You've only come because you hate me and you want me out of here. Don't get thrown off by that, because what you'll notice in the conversation is Abimelech doesn't even touch it. He doesn't go, wait a second. We need clarification here. That is not what, because then what would happen if he addressed this spiritually immature response? The rest of the conversation would have been in the mire of the spiritually immature response. I don't know if you've been there with somebody and gone that path, and they throw out this little tidbit of emotion, and you are never back on track again as far as resolving the conflict. You're into a whole emotional thing where they were wrong, they were right, you were wrong, and it just spirals out of any ability to actually touch on the issue and get it taken care of. Abimelech doesn't even mess with it. He doesn't go, wait a second, that's not how it happened. I got witnesses. And we don't have a court of law now opening up, going, trying to deal with this immature comment that Isaac is making, that everybody hates him. He doesn't even touch it. So principle number 3 is don't get thrown off by exaggerated accounts of the past. Because people have emotional responses to things in the past, and that emotional response can become the focus of the energy, not on resolving the conflict. So the past is the past. And there might be times when you have to deal with the past so that it's not repeated, but definitely don't let it influence the present. In the present situations, we need to resolve this conflict. Isaac says, why have you come? You hate me. It's probably a reference all the way back there in verse 16. And I think the mature person here is Abimelech. He doesn't even go there with him. He just like, okay, no, really, what is really happening here is we're in disagreement with each other because we're both invading each other's space, and we need to have an idea of how we can move apart from each other and still remain in good relationships. So principle number 4 is then to develop a strategy by which all parties will actively behave in order to bring about the peaceful future. Each party has played a role in the conflict, and each party must play a role in the resolution. And he spells it out. We're going to do this. We're going to have a covenant. You're not going to harm me. And Abimelech has, I think he's walked in with a fairly well thought out strategy of how to resolve the conflict and not get mired in all of the energy, emotional energy that's going on along with it. Then they make a plan, and a really great thing to do in conflict resolution is then to reevaluate that plan as needed. I remember doing this with our kids. You know, we have a conflict where there's things that both sides can deal with, and then you make this plan, and then within a short period of time, either it kind of crops back up again, and you got to rethink your way through it, or it doesn't crop up, but it needs some evaluation down the road. How did this work? Did it work okay? Are we still good on this area? You kind of have to reevaluate this plan that you develop to try to help both parties see how they're involved and what they need to do different. So Abimelech says, we see plainly in verse 28 that the Lord has been with you. So we said, let there be a sworn pact between us. So he's making this plan. Let us make a covenant, which is even more than a sworn pact. There's going to be some consequences. Remember when we looked at covenants, and a covenant was cut between animals laid out, and the people walked between the animals. We have references to it in different places in the Old Testament. So I'm going to make a covenant. I'm going to make an agreement, but then the covenant goes one more step. Animals are slaughtered, and the groups of people that are going to make this agreement walk through the animals, so as to say when they get to the end, if I don't keep my end of the bargain, let what happened to these animals happen. So there's consequences. They've laid out consequences with people that you're in relationships with, in a management situation, with kids, even with adults, husbands and wives. We've counseled with husband and wife. Like, this is immature behavior. This cannot keep going on, and there needs to be consequences if this behavior happens again. Whatever it might be on her part. I'm going to throw this out here as an exaggeration. She's spending money in ways that she shouldn't. Well, that's immature spiritual behavior. We have to address, why is this thing happening? There needs to be consequences if that happens again. If the husband is doing things that he ought not to be doing, that's resolved. There needs to be consequences if it happens again. That's how we learn that way, especially if the consequences are somewhat uncomfortable. And so there's the consequences here in the cutting of the covenant. Not only have we made an agreement, they have agreed together there will be consequences if one of us doesn't keep our end of this agreement. What I think is worthwhile in every conflict resolution scenario, whether it's in an office situation, a family situation, a church situation, there was a celebration of their victory. There was a victory celebration. Look, we have had a difficult time together. We've gone through this. We've resolved this. We've said, this is what's going to happen. Let's go have dinner together. What did they do? It's exactly what they do here. They not only do they make this covenant, but then that evening they have a feast, and they eat, and they drink together through the night, and in the morning they're off and heading their own direction. I think little celebrations of victories in human relationships is a great thing. Not just concentrating on the behavior we don't want, but then thinking about the behavior we want and rewarding it like a little victory. Like, we resolved this. Let's go have dinner together. We resolved this. Let's go have coffee and talk and just remember what we're trying to do, and that we're in this together, and it's about us. We're not going to let this conflict. That's the one thing that's hard for people, is to not this is about us, not letting conflict get in between us. We're us, and nothing should be coming between us. That has to happen in the church too. We're the body. We're trying to keep things from coming between us and getting themselves wedged in. And when we do that successfully, we should celebrate that and be thankful that God is maintaining our unity and keeping us bound together in a relationship of peace. So I don't think there's anything wrong. I don't think we should be afraid to celebrate the victory they do together by having a wonderful feast. Principle number 6 is just because you can do it one time doesn't mean that it's guaranteed it's going to happen again. Because just about the time you get good at resolving one conflict, it seems like there's another one just waiting behind it to be addressed. And so you have to bring the exact same principles to bear again on the circumstance, because there will be a conflict again in this family's life. There will be conflicts between the children again. There will be conflicts between mom and dad again. There will be conflicts between the parents and the children. In the morning they rose early. I'm on the back of your outline now, page 11. They exchanged oaths, and Isaac sent them away on their way, and they departed from him in peace. Principle number 7, the one who refuses to live at peace must be removed from the community. They are at peace, and yet they still need to separate because there's too much conflict by their proximity. But here's what Jesus says in Matthew 18:17. If this individual refuses to listen to the group, to the small group, 2 or 3 people, and there's no way of resolving, they are not going to work their way through whatever the resolution needs to look like, then you take it to the body, to the church. If they refuse then to listen to the church, let them be as a Gentile and a tax collector. Because the one thing that is infectious as any COVID disease is someone who wants to make problems and create division, and who is just looking to maintain a sense of fighting and the victimhood and not wanting to deal with whatever is going on. That is contagious. And so Jesus says that needs to be removed from the body, just like Paul told Titus. Titus 3:10, next paragraph. As for a person who stirs up division, and they are not wanting to resolve it, they are not being willing to be confronted on that, stop that kind of behavior, cease and desist from, whatever people who stir up division are using one of those fleshly, immature problem-solving tactics. They're fighting with people, they're gaining people for favoritism on sides, they're deceiving people, they're stirring up this kind of division after warning them once and then twice, have nothing more to do with them, knowing that such persons are warped and sinful, they are self-condemned. The greatest Christ-like principle that must be applied for this type of conflict resolution to be successful is biblical forgiveness. This whole thing centers on whether or not someone comes to you and you are willing to admit that your end of what is happening, and there is a willingness on both parties to forgive and move on. Probably biblical forgiveness is one of the greatest mature principles, mature qualities of a mature Christian's life. Can they forgive? Can they ask for forgiveness and also grant forgiveness? All of these principles, these 8 principles, require mature biblical forgiveness. Because if someone, here's the paragraph, if someone sins against me and I go to them and address it with them, the best of all scenario plays out and they confess and ask for forgiveness, I have to be willing to forgive them. Otherwise, this is all for nothing. I would say before you even go and address it, you need to forgive them so that your heart is right before God before you go and ask someone else to address their heart before God, their sin. If you have unforgiveness in your heart, you have a sin issue, and now you think you can go and confront somebody else about their sin issue? So this forgiveness has to be in play from the very beginning. And as I said, I think biblical forgiveness is a mark of great spiritual maturity. They may have offended you unaware that they did so. Unforgiveness is a sin of willful determination. Somebody might not even know they've sinned against you, but you not being willing to forgive them, that is determined. They might sin and they didn't. I don't know. But just to be unforgiving, you are determining to carry on that action. Now, if we were in that text, how are we doing on time? I thought this was very interesting. I hadn't really seen this before. Can you go back with me to Matthew 18? Let's close there. Matthew 18. So in verse 15, Jesus starts his teaching, Matthew 18:15. On conflict between two people and how they are to handle it. See that 18:15? We're pretty familiar with that passage of Scripture. At least we ought to be, because that is the greatest passage of Scripture to help us to deal with one of the greatest problems in the human race, which is conflict. 15 through 20, Jesus spells out this idea of going to them and addressing it, which demands forgiveness. Now, Peter, if you know a little bit about his personality, he's got to be thinking, okay, this is an interesting idea, and I kind of see the value in this. Someone sins against me, so I go to them. They say, oh, please forgive me. I'm obligated to forgive them for this principle to work. So as soon as Peter gets a word in edgewise, what does he ask? Verse 21. Lord, how often? Peter's like a numbers guy, right? Like, okay, I get this, and I can see the wheels in his mind turning. And they would, because they would in my mind. Jesus is asking me to forgive somebody who sinned against me. My first thought too is like, how often do I gotta do that? And that sounds like a great idea, but what if they do it twice? The same thing. Now, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice. Right? That whole idea. At one time, I might be forgiving, but I'm not gonna be your punching bag. I'm not going to be your pin cushion. I'm not just going to sit here and let you do that to me again and then say, yeah, I forgive you. But part of conflict resolution is there's going to be some consequences in that. And if they do it several times, that also might be a reason to then bring it to the church. So that you can, because part of the conflict would be that it happens multiple times. But in Peter's mind, he's like, how often do I have to do this, Lord? 7? Like a brother sins again, because he's putting the 2 and 2 together. Because chapter 18:15 goes with verse 21 too. Because Peter is taking Jesus' teaching and he's going, how do I actually walk this out? How do I apply this to my life? How often do I have to apply this principle? 7 times? They sin against me and I forgive them. As many as 7 times, Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times. He's thinking, oh good, 4. No. 77 times. This is why love and forgiveness have to be at the forefront of spiritual maturity if we're ever going to deal with the spiritual immaturity that brings us into conflict with one another. Where that little guy is putting his finger in the light and it's turning red. Peter, as sharp as he is, realizes that this is the implication of Jesus' teaching. So as soon as he can get a word in, he asks, how many times do I have to do this? Principle number 8. Your ability to biblically address conflict in one situation is no guarantee you will not have to face it in others, or that you will automatically be, oh, that's what I just did from 6. Oh, that isn't. then it'll automatically be successful the next time. Genesis chapter 27, we will witness one of the greatest acts of cold-blooded deception in all the scriptures as a means of resolving family disputes. So you would have thought they could have gotten it. You know, here's this dispute, here's how it was handled, it worked so well. Let's try it the next time. They don't. The next time out, we find, if you were to ask for, like, give me the greatest story of unbelievable deceit, this would be in the top 10 in chapter 27 of the book of Genesis. That